The day I finally moved into my lake cabin was supposed to be one of peace and accomplishment. After years of saving and months of renovations, I was ready to settle into the quiet retreat that had belonged to my family for generations. Nestled deep in the woods, the cabin stood on land untouched by the sprawl of city life, surrounded by towering pines and the steady shimmer of the lake. A long, winding dirt road stretched from the county highway all the way to my property, a road I had paid to repair and maintain myself. It was more than just a driveway. It was a symbol of the boundary between my private sanctuary and the noise of the outside world. My truck was packed to the brim, movers were unloading furniture, and my wife was happily unpacking boxes. For the first time in months I could breathe. That peace lasted all of 30 minutes. The sound of sirens tore through the stillness, echoing off the lake and cutting through the crisp air like a blade. At first I thought it must be a mistake. Sirens weren't something we heard often out here. This wasn't the kind of place that invited trouble, but as the flashing red and blue lights drew closer, bouncing across the trees and reflecting off the cabin windows, I realized those sirens were headed straight for me. My stomach sank, and my first thought was that there had been some kind of emergency. But then I saw her, Karen. There she stood, smug and self-assured, marching up the road behind the two police cruisers like she had personally summoned the law to bend to her will. Her oversized sunglasses perched dramatically on her face, her arms crossed as if she was already victorious. Karen was the self-proclaimed queen of the local HOA, a woman who thrived on control, power, and intimidation. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was a one-woman storm, constantly harassing residents over the tiniest things: mailbox colors, lawn heights, fence sizes. And now, apparently, she had set her sights on me. The cruisers rolled to a stop at the edge of my driveway, gravel crunching under their tires. Two officers stepped out, scanning the scene cautiously, as if unsure what they were walking into. Karen wasted no time. She rushed forward, pointing dramatically in my direction like she was unveiling a villain in a crime drama. "There," she shouted, "that man is trespassing on HOA property. He's illegally occupying this land, and he refuses to pay his HOA fees." I blinked, stunned for a moment. Then the absurdity of it hit me and I couldn't help but laugh. HOA fees? Trespassing? This was my land I had inherited, land I had poured time, money, and energy into restoring. My cabin had never once fallen under HOA jurisdiction, and Karen knew it. But the confidence with which she spoke gave the officers pause. One of them turned to me and asked for documentation, deeds, proof of ownership, anything that could settle the matter. Karen's smug grin widened as if she had already won. She folded her arms, lifted her chin, and watched like a cat waiting for a trapped mouse to squirm. She was so sure she had cornered me, so certain her intimidation tactics would work as they always did. To her, I was just another person to bully, another neighbor to scare into submission, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I excused myself calmly, walked into the cabin, and retrieved the folder I had prepared weeks earlier. I had anticipated something like this from Karen. After all, she had already tried to block construction permits, complain about trucks on the road, and even spread rumors that my cabin wasn't legally habitable. I had kept every document neatly organized: the deed to the cabin, the land survey, the tax records, and most importantly, the plat map that clearly outlined property lines. When I returned, I handed the papers to the officers without a word. The silence that followed was deafening. The officers flipped through the documents, their expressions slowly shifting from uncertainty to clarity. The deed was in my name. The land survey was current and official. Every record confirmed what I already knew. The cabin was on private property that I owned outright. There was no HOA authority here. None. Karen's entire argument was a fabrication built on arrogance and assumption. And then came the twist that neither officer had been expecting. I pointed to the plat map, tracing the property lines with my finger. "Not only is this cabin on my land," I explained, "but this road, the only road leading to Karen's house and several others, runs entirely through my property. It isn't public. It isn't HOA maintained. It's mine. Every car that passes here does so because I allow it. The officers exchanged a glance, eyebrows raised. Karen's smirk collapsed into shock. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since I had known her, she was speechless. The color drained from her face as the reality of the situation settled in. She hadn't just made a baseless accusation. She had launched a full-scale attack on the one person who held the power to control her access to her own home. The officers turned to Karen, their tone firm now. They explained that she had no legal authority here, that this was a civil matter she had fabricated, and that wasting police resources over false claims was a serious offense. Karen stammered, trying to regain her composure, but the confidence that had carried her here was gone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the weight of her own arrogance had finally crushed her. I stood quietly, letting the truth speak for itself. The officers handed my documents back and apologized for the intrusion, assuring me that they now understood the situation. They warned Karen to stay off my property unless invited, and to stop filing false complaints. Karen tried to protest, but the officers shut her down quickly, making it clear they had wasted enough time on her theatrics. As the cruisers pulled away, Karen lingered at the edge of my driveway, her sunglasses trembling in her hand. She shot me a glare filled with venom, but I could see the fear behind it. She wasn't just angry, she was rattled. For years, she had ruled the HOA like a tyrant, bullying anyone who crossed her. But in her rush to dominate me, she had overlooked one critical detail. Power means nothing when the land beneath your feet belongs to someone else. That evening, as the sun set over the lake and the movers finished unloading the last box, I sat on my porch and let the events replay in my mind. Karen had stormed in, called the cops and tried to strip me of my rights, only to expose her own vulnerability in the process. The irony was almost poetic. She had wanted to humiliate me, but instead she had revealed to the entire neighborhood that the very road she depended on wasn't hers to claim. And though the confrontation had ended for the day, I knew deep down this wasn't the last I'd hear from her. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She would be back, scheming, plotting, and desperate to reclaim her sense of control. But unlike the neighbors she had bullied before, I wasn't afraid of her. I had the truth, the law, and the land itself on my side. The storm had only just begun. The morning after the police incident, the cabin felt unusually quiet. The movers had gone, the boxes were stacked neatly, and the only sound was the gentle ripple of the lake brushing against the shore. But I knew better than to let the silence fool me. Karen wasn't someone who accepted defeat easily. Her pride was too inflated, her ego too fragile, and her need for control too consuming. The fact that she had been embarrassed in front of the police, with her lies exposed so publicly, meant only one thing. She was going to come back swinging, and I didn't have to wait long. Just as the sun was creeping over the tree line, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. I set down my coffee and stepped onto the porch. There she was again, Karen storming up the road with the same energy as the day before, except this time she wasn't flanked by the police. She had reinforcements, 3 other HOA board members, each clutching folders and clipboards, like they were about to conduct some kind of official hearing. They marched in a straight line, their faces tight with determination. It was as if Karen had rallied her troops overnight, desperate to reclaim some shred of dignity. "Sir," one of them called out, his voice dripping with self-importance, "we've come to inform you that this property falls under HOA jurisdiction. You are required to submit to the bylaws, pay dues, and comply with our regulations. Failure to do so will result in fines and potential foreclosure." I almost laughed. They were doubling down. After being humiliated in front of law enforcement, Karen had convinced her board that intimidation was still the way forward. The confidence in their stride suggested they thought I would finally cave, that the pressure of an entire HOA standing on my porch would be enough to break me. But they still didn't understand. They still hadn't looked at the plat map. They still didn't realize the truth. I let them finish their little speech before calmly asking, "And how exactly do you plan to enforce these regulations if the only road to your homes runs across land that I own?" The words hit them like a hammer. I pulled out the same folder I had shown the officers, flipping it open on the porch railing so they could see for themselves. The deed, the land survey, the plat map, all there in black and white. I traced the road with my finger again, showing them how it cut through my land before winding up to their cul-de-sac. I explained that the county had never claimed it, that it wasn't public, and that every HOA member living beyond my property line had been driving across my road for years without realizing who it truly belonged to. The board members' expressions shifted from smug confidence to dawning horror. One of them stammered, But that can't be. The road's always been here. It's always been HOA maintained." I shook my head. "No, the HOA has never laid a finger on this road. I've been the one maintaining it, filling the potholes, grading the gravel, paying for the upkeep. You've been benefiting from my work without even knowing it." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Karen's face turned red, a mix of anger and humiliation bubbling beneath her skin. She tried to interrupt, to accuse me again, but the board members were no longer hanging on her words. They were staring at the documents in disbelief, realizing just how precarious their situation was. That was when I decided to drive the point home. "I've never been the kind of person to block a neighbor's access," I said evenly, meeting each of their eyes. "But let me make one thing crystal clear. If this harassment continues, if you keep filing false complaints, if you keep trespassing, if you keep threatening me with fake regulations, I will have every legal right to shut down this road. And when that happens, you'll have no way in or out. Not without cutting a deal with me." The weight of those words hung in the air like a thundercloud. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing just how much trouble Karen had caused them all. Another muttered something under his breath about needing to check the bylaws, but his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. They weren't here to enforce authority anymore. They were realizing they had no authority to begin with. Karen, however, refused to give in. She stepped forward, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You can't do this. You can't threaten us like this. We'll sue. We'll take you to court. The HOA has power, and you'll regret crossing me." But her words rang hollow. Everyone could see she was flailing. The board members avoided her gaze, clearly embarrassed by her outburst. They had followed her here expecting victory, and instead they had been handed undeniable proof that she had lied to them. Karen wasn't their fearless leader anymore. She was the one who had dragged them into a fight they couldn't win. Didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I simply closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and said, "Do whatever you feel is necessary. But remember, every time you drive home, every time you walk down this road, every delivery, guess it all comes through me. Think very carefully about how far you want to push this." With that, I turned and walked back into my cabin, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. From the window, I watched as the group slowly dispersed. The board members exchanged hushed words, clearly frustrated with Karen, before trudging back down the road. Karen lingered for a moment, glaring at my cabin with eyes full of venom before finally storming off after them. That night, the neighborhood grapevine lit up. I heard whispers from other residents, people who had no idea that the road belonged to me until now. Some of them called to apologize for Karen's behavior, assuring me they wanted no part in her games. Others expressed relief that someone had finally stood up to her. Karen had ruled the HOA with fear for too long, and now, for the first time, people saw her for what she truly was, powerless without her intimidation. The irony was almost poetic. She had called the cops on me to try and force me out of my own home, but in doing so, she had revealed just how fragile her control really was. She didn't own the road, she didn't own me. And no matter how many times she tried to flex her so-called authority, the truth would always outweigh her lies. Karen had picked the wrong battle, and deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of her downfall. If you want to hear how Karen's downfall unfolds, and how HOA bullies finally get exposed, don't forget to subscribe to HOA Karen Stories for more jaw-dropping tales.